Okay, we had a few interruptions with the construction, but we'll maybe try to squeeze this in before maybe some of that sound hits again. We started talking about digestion yesterday. So name a structure that we have discussed with the digestive system of birds. Okay, so what can we presume that we're referring to when we say esophagus then? Because that's not the only tube that you would find within the neck of birds, because that's where it'd be located. You would have the esophagus and what else? That's a little too far down. You'd have the pharynx, that's true, but what is it that how mammals, humans, and birds essentially breathe? Air or oxygen has to travel through which tube, which would be the trachea then. That's right. So what that means then, okay, is as food particles would possibly be traveling down that esophagus, what is at the terminal end of that esophagus or muscular tube? We said with humans and mammals, yes, digestion can be initiated here, but when we think of digestion, it's more so breaking things down and being able to absorb them. So the stomach really isn't where digestion takes place. But in birds, what structure would that be? Yeah, it's essentially the crop, and then the tube or esophagus does not collapse because it's got what shape around it? It's got a C-shaped structure. And very similar to humans with our trachea is that there's got cartilaginous rings then that don't allow that to collapse then. Okay, so that's where we had left off with at the terminal end of the esophagus. We had mentioned yesterday that's where you find, of course, the crop. And it's just a storage container. So when we say storage container, is there any digestion taking place there?
No.
Correct. There would be no digestion that takes place. It has to go further down into more, I wouldn't say complex structures, but where we could presume there's probably a more adequate blood supply, even though, yes, this is an organ, and it's going to have its own blood supply to it, this structure, but it's not meant for digestion because no absorption is taking place there. So rather than saying, yes, we could say stomach, but a better term for that is what we call the proventricularis, okay? So what we see happening here is, just like in humans and mammals, okay, gastric juice, there's going to be some enzymes. When we say gastric juice, that is a very vague term because you actually have, again, enzymes and acids that are secreted within that substance. It doesn't mean you're going to absorb anything. It just means that's where things are going to begin to start to break down. But they're not absorbed, okay? And there's other aspects that we say are vague terms like saliva, okay? Just like the same saliva that mammals would have in their mouths and humans would have in their mouths. We got salivary glands. So we call that a very vague term. Is some people might say spit. Okay, well, okay. So there's a liquid substance that you would find inside the mouth. Well, of course, there's water. That's inside there. What else would you find? Well, there's going to be enzymes because that's where, okay, our crespitos actually starts to begin its digestion, breakdown, not digestion because nothing's being absorbed. But with our crespitos, what type of substance wraps around the hamburger? So it's a type, we wouldn't say shell, well you could, but what is that shell made of? What type of dietary substance would that be? Would it be a fat, a lipid, a protein, a starch, or a nucleic acid, would you think?
A protein.
That would be the hamburger inside. That would be of that aspect. So as we look around, I don't see anybody having any Cheez-Its, or maybe there was some earlier. Maybe we need to take a look in the garbage here. Any wrappers in there? Oh yeah, there's some sort of wrapper. Okay. So Lay's classic potato chips. Okay. So even though you're talking about potatoes, what substance are potatoes high in? Starch, which is carbohydrates. Same thing, same similar types of starches that you would see wrapped around your Crispito today. Okay, so that actually begins to be broken down by an enzyme, along with, we say spit, there's enzymes, there's water, and then there's also a thickening agent called mucus that's inside that saliva and or spit. So when we say gastric juice, it's a very vague term, just like that of spit. So then, okay, we had made reference to this. Now we're talking about digestion. When digestion takes place, what can you presume from that? How's that different from being broken down? It's still continually broken down, but if there is a more adequate blood supply within the gizzard, what can you presume from that? It'd be like the small intestine in humans. What is going to take place within that structure? And well, it does that, but after it's crushed up, just like in the small intestine of humans, what happens because you have all of this capillary action, very tiny blood vessels that surround your small intestine? I think you said it, but say it again. Yeah, you're actually going to be able to absorb that material, okay? And that's what's happening here. Now we're digesting things because they're starting to be broken down into smaller bits, because in the crop, it's just being stored there. Nothing's really happening. It's just inside there, whether it's rocks, whether it's, you can probably find coins in there. I've seen that when butchering chickens, although I don't know why a dime would be dropped in the chicken house, but I don't know, happened anyway. So then, but it says grinding of food. Well, why not grind that up when it's inside its beak and or mouth? It doesn't have any teeth to do that. So these animals / birds are taking all these substances that they find on the ground, usually rocks, going into the crop, then moves on to the gizzard, and then has all these sharp edges so that when that gizzard is contracting, it's really, I wouldn't say chomping, but really grinding that food down, breaking it up into smaller bits. And then with grain-eating birds, well, then you also have that taking place. But digestion is probably a little more difficult for any type of animal that is taking in grains and different types of plants as opposed to being a meat eater. Of course, an owl is just a little different. I was kind of the odd cases of that, because when we saw in the raptor video, what do owls do with their prey item?
They jump on.
Well, that's true. But then we could presume that eagles do that too with chasing after rabbits. Yeah, larger raptors do, but owls do something rather unique. Yeah, you saw that little tiny owl there, and it's flipping its head up and trying to, I don't know, you could say gain momentum. It has that that mouse in its mouth, and it continually does that until it goes down whole. Then what happens is digestion would take place inside its gizzard, but then the bones don't go any further than that. What do these nature selected these animals to do this? What would you call a pellet? Have you ever heard of owl pellets? And what would you find inside of there? bones and other different types of structures. The reason it's found inside of there is that when that is broken down inside the gizzard, it doesn't go any further, and all them sharp objects are then surrounded by what we call that pellet, then they regurgitate it. Okay, so different types of birds have different types of diets, whether it's moving in one direction or essentially two. Okay, then we saw this back with the reptiles because remember these are actually related to reptiles because we have that in-between animal called the Archaeopteryx between reptiles and birds. So what we see, it's at the lower end of the digestive tract, but then it's also part of the reproductive tract then as well. That structure called the cloaca. So it doesn't have anything up on the board. I think circulation is next. So we'll talk about the circulatory system and then maybe respiratory system after that. So yep, it's circulation and then respiratory system, which is actually quite complex. But we will get to that tomorrow. So now that the construction has ceased, again, I think circulation is on the schedule for tomorrow. So that's where we'll stop. You can continue working on these papers because they are due a week from Thursday as of right now, the 27th. All right, we'll catch up to you next time.